Well, Michael Bociurkiw is a global affairs analyst and joins me now over Skype from Ottawa. So Navalny is finally in Berlin at hospital, and of course he's having these tests that are being conducted by German doctors. How closely is everyone watching for the diagnosis?
Oh, very closely. I mean, what happened does fit a Putin pattern of intimidating his critics. And of course, Navalny is the #1 critic. This sends a very chilling signal yet again that the long arm of the Kremlin can hit anybody either in Russia or outside of Russia. And by the way, Maryam, I just had to add, I just heard the interview with Svetlana, and to me, that sounded like someone who is very afraid and very intimidated about coming back to a country which has the very long tentacles of the Russian Secret Service in it. So that in itself also is very chilling.
Just on the point about Navalny, even if a poisoning diagnosis is confirmed, it's very difficult, isn't it, even with an investigation, to figure out who did it, particularly as someone like Navalny. I mean, you know, he spoke out against oligarchs, against businessmen, against all types of corruption. He had opponents outside of the Kremlin as well.
Yes, he did. Well, first of all, about the opponents outside of the Kremlin, I think there's also a pattern, Maryam, of vigilantes or people loyal to the Kremlin doing acts on their own. So this could have been that. But in terms of finding out what exactly happened, I mean, I refer you back to the case of Viktor Yushchenko, the former Ukrainian president, who was poisoned by his own Ukrainian security service, which was infiltrated by the Russians. That never really was solved, but it took months and months of therapy and of treatment, and he's still recovering to this day. So these are very, very horrible things to happen to people who are, you know, used to being on the front lines and used to being critics.
Now, you were mentioning the interview earlier with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and she has been very vocal, really speaking to many different people in the past 24 hours. She was saying that she will never forget the violence, the arrests, the torture that people have suffered since that disputed presidential election. But I suppose the fear in the country now is that it might all have been for nothing if President Lukashenko continues to dig his heels in.
Yeah, and I'm very worried about that because right now for autocrats like, you know, their Belarusian president Lukashenko, and for people like Putin, the geopolitics, if you will, are very fertile ground for them. And what I mean by that, there's a U.S. election coming up. There's a U.S. president who is indifferent to autocrats. The world is distracted by COVID-19. We have a dysfunctional U.S. Congress, and that's important to mention because they are the ones who approve more funding and back up sanctions. And we have a very, very emboldened President Putin. So for you know, these harsh tactics to be employed and for very little response from the West, that's what we can expect. And just quickly, if I can, I spoke recently to Ambassador Bill Taylor, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, and I asked him what is in Mr. Putin's mind, and he said, well, we don't know, but we should be prepared for anything. And to deter further Russian aggression, the sanctions toolbox is by no means empty.
Without a clear political plan or roadmap, though, for the opposition, will the protests just lose momentum?
I don't think so. I think the public there in Belarus are entirely fed up, especially with corruption and especially with the government's handling. It was a debacle of the COVID-19 crisis. And, you know, we have to remember that basically the protest movement in Hong Kong and to a certain extent in Iran and even in Belarus are kind of leaderless. And in this age of social media, of people being able to gather almost on the spur of the moment through social media is a very, very different playing field, a very unfamiliar playing field for these autocrats. So that's something they have to deal with these days, and they're not very used to it.
Michael Bociurkiw, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
You're at the NewsHour live from London. Much more still to tell you about. Thousands of lightning strikes ignite some of the largest wildfires in California's history. The Syrian migrants who were injured in Beirut's deadly port explosion now left to fend for themselves. And then later in sport, England's new cricket stars rack up records. Peter will have those details.